Meantime, the UN human rights chief is also urging all nations involved in the current conflict to take immediate steps to de-escalate and, quote, give peace a chance. Joining me now is former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Ivo Dahler. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Give me your sense on the latest in the conflict, the escalation that we did see. You know, NATO, we had the incident with the possibility of the missile that was shot down as it was about to head into Turkish airspace. But we're still, confirmation 16 countries that are now involved in some way in this conflict. What's your take on where things are at this point and where we could end up over the weekend into next week?
So I think we're going to see continuation of the war and acceleration in some ways and escalation. The Iranians are trying to inflict as much damage on America's partners, on the economy, to find a way to convince the United States in particular to end the fighting. At the same time, the president seems to be determined to go on for as long as necessary. And the big problem is what is necessary, since it's not clear what the goal is. This morning, apparently the goal was unconditional surrender, including then the rebuilding of Iran, which smacks like nation building, and regime change, the two things that the president ran against, both in his first time for office and the second time for office. So until we have a really clear sense what the goal here is, it's very hard to see how we're going to find a way to end it.
It feels like those goalposts, as you mentioned, are changing, and it's not necessarily the same messaging day to day from the U.S. president and from this administration, at least at this point. In your experience with NATO, too, as well, we've heard from the Secretary General right now. I don't believe that NATO necessarily will get involved in any way in the conflict at this point. Do you think that might change, or is it mostly and possibly going to be in the aftermath that we see some of the NATO forces, or at least the alliance, get involved?
No, I don't think the alliance is going to get involved unless, of course, there is a direct attack on NATO territory. And we saw one missile, and it's not clear that that missile was actually targeted at Turkey. It may have been errant, but we saw one missile hitting, trying to get into Turkish airspace. It was shot down. That's what a defensive alliance does. It didn't immediately decide to join, and quite the contrary, there were discussions at NATO headquarters, but there's no invocation of Article 5, the Collective Defense Treaty, unless and until NATO faces a true armed attack. I don't see NATO getting involved, including afterwards. There are deep divisions within Europe. In fact, most European governments are very, very reluctant to side with the United States and Israel on this conflict. They're willing to protect their own forces against the Iranian reprisals. But the idea of getting involved, let alone on the ground, is something that I think we're very far away from, if ever going to get there.
Now, we saw some pushback from Spain at the beginning of this conflict, too, not allowing the U.S. to use their bases in order to help facilitate the initial days and the initial strikes on Iran, too. Are you expecting some more fractures now, too, as a result of this conflict? Is that a possibility for the alliance moving forward as a result of what's happening in the Middle East?
Well, I hope it's a kind of a wake-up moment for everyone. For the United States, first and foremost, to understand that in order to conduct these kinds of operations, it actually needs the goodwill and the participation of its allies. You cannot fight a war in the Middle East without using bases, ports, waterways, airspace of your allies. So perhaps next time when you start a war, you spend some time explaining to the allies, and by the way, and the American people would be good too, why it is that what you're doing, what the goal is, and how we will know and measure success. So I hope that's one response. The other response is to have a more collective sense of what the threat is and how to deal with it effectively, and that we learn from what we see here is that getting allies on board is not something that you assume. It's something you work on.
I really appreciate your time today, Ivo Dahler, former U.S. Ambassador to NATO. Thank you for this, sir.
My pleasure.